Hi, Victor Vogel again, author of Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone, this book right here. Um, I want to take a minute and sort of cover an area that I think is important when you're kind of defining how you're going to protect yourself. It means a whole lot about not only what you use to protect yourself, but also what you choose as self-defense. So I won't make this real long, but I just want to bring this up as a teaser for you to understand what you need to be looking at um, in today's time, and to think about it ahead of time before anything might happen from that standpoint. So, what I'd like to do is just out of the book here, I'd like to just read the opening chapter, and so you have a clear sense of kind of what I'm getting to. And it says protection is a culture, it's not an activity. Um, and I have a quote under that from Sun Tzu from The Art of War. And Sun Tzu, who was a Chinese general, very successful. The Art of War was a very successful book. A lot of businesses use it today, but it's very applicable to defining your protection. And Sun Tzu said, be extremely subtle, even to the point of formlessness. Be extremely mysterious, even to the point of soundlessness. Thereby you can be the director of your opponent's fate. And so to do that, to have that subtleness, to be calm and be collective while you're protecting yourself, means you sort of have to have a sense of what is your thoughts about protection, and how are you going to handle it if it does arise. And in the first chapter in my book, I bring this in terms of your culture and how you've been raised and how that's going to impact you. So culture is don't it's very broad, very large perspective. So I've used some theory from a professor way back in, I think he was probably back into the 60s or 70s. Had a theory I thought was pretty sound, and what I've tried to do is sort of graphically somehow put together a graphic that represents what he presented in his papers and books in very succinct, simple terms, so the average person might be able to understand that. It's very professors get very theoretical, and as a consultant I always tried to bring theory down to the real world and to application. So let me just pop this chart up and sort of let's talk about culture and what culture means. Brian Tracy, by the way, was the person who I was referring to here. This is all his ideas. It's just this little model of something I put together to kind of think about how it works. And what I want you to think about is a circle. In the middle is the strongest aspect of the circle, and as you move your way out toward the outer perimeters, you can begin to see how different people affect you. So towards the inner part of the circle are your core values. These are values you grew up with, and these are most likely values that you're going to feel really committed to. These are, by core values, these are things that are not easily changed by anybody else. There are things like love and hate and religious beliefs and things like that. So think about core values. You have to ask yourself, inside me, what is really driving who I am and what I'm about? What values do I have in my life? And how are they going to impact how I decide what I will do in a violent situation? So these core values, when you take a look at them and start talking about them, when you put them together, they kind of represent what's called beliefs or a belief system. These are things you believe. These are things that guide who you are, how you behave, how you interact, how you behave within in the environment that you're in. And some of the positive beliefs might be generosity and compassion and caring, and some of the negative belief systems that could be part of your core value system could be narcissism, greed, or disdain for others. So there's an example. Core values can be positive or they can be negative or they can be a combination of both. But normally they are things that are not easily changed. So at the core value level, they're a little more black and white. When you put them into belief systems, they can be impacted a little bit by other people. For example, if you love somebody a whole lot, it's going to be really hard to have disdain for them unless they somehow kill that love and consequently create a hate scenario. So you can see how belief systems evolve around your core values, and you start setting up these belief systems that talk about who you are, what you think is right, and what you think is wrong come from this. This sets the expectation, and this is the expectations you have are driven by your values, your core values, which create your belief system. So your core values and your belief system in combination start setting expectations. If you have positive values and belief, you will view others in basically the same kind of way. You might say you're that person sees the world or the cup half full versus half empty is an old analogy that's used. So these expectations sort of set up how you look at things that are going on around you. So as you can see, when we come in here, the further out you go on this, what we would call a circumflex or a circle that sort of expands out, the more you might be affected by other people or other things. So once you have your core beliefs or your core values and your belief systems, and they've created a set of expectations, now you come up with a series of attitudes that you have, and these are things that you outwardly manifest towards other people. These are what other people see about your beliefs and your values. In many ways, this becomes a large part of your communication structure, and so that's important for you to be clear about how you're representing yourself to others. So these attitudes that you are creating from expectation, or let's go back, and so the core values create your belief systems, they set up your expectations, and now you have attitudes that you live and operate by. And the next thing is we come out here and you have these actions, and these are the sort of observable behaviors that you show to other people. They're at the root of your core values, they're at the root of those, and they affect all of this. So how you behave makes a difference. If your core value is one of bigotry and your belief systems are racist, then you might set up a series of expectations that all people of a different color are bad, and your attitude towards those people is going to be negative, and so consequently you don't treat them properly. So you can kind of see how this works out. Now let's take it in terms of the protection side of things, okay? And the protection side of things, let's say you're going to have to decide how you're going to protect yourself, and perhaps you're believing your core value. If you're a Christian, and your core value is to love your neighbors, and you really, really believe that you need to do this, and it's not defined by certain neighbors. Christ never defined it in terms of certain neighbors. He defined it in terms of all. So that's all your neighbors. That's everyone. So you would love your neighbor, which sets up this belief that you should have compassion and caring and love for your neighbor. And what's involved in love is giving and helping, and all those things are associated with that. So your expectation is when you when you see people, you don't necessarily see them in a suspicious sort of way. You see them in a very open, loving, caring way. So you might miss a lot of the characteristics that a criminal has if you don't know about them, if you haven't studied about them, if you don't know about their behaviors. You might miss those characteristics. And so consequently, your attitude is to have an open, caring, and sharing aspect about this. And that's the way churches are. You think about this, their culture from a protection standpoint has led them to have an attitude of openness. So what they do is they encourage everyone to come in, and you provide them open arms and loving and caring. So the last thing you suspect is somebody's going to come into that church to a Bible study group and just open fire on them because they are black. Even though this person, I believe it was South Carolina, did this, he was white and he was racist to the core. This church did not have a policy of protection. They did not have that much of a security program. Everyone was welcome. And when he came to the Bible study group, they didn't see him as someone who was going to be carrying a gun and shooting them. They saw him from their core value system, was someone who was seeking the truth and loving and wanting to belong and be part of them. So how you decide to protect yourself has a lot to do with your core value systems. And when you think about this, you got to remember this area outside of this circle, all this white area out here, are all the other people who have a similar cultural orientation, which may be just the opposite of yours. They may be racist and bigoted, and they may not be a Christian and loving and open and caring. So in living in this world out here, if you are, for example, a Christian, you have to decide, how am I going to protect this self and still not violate my core values and belief systems? And what would I do in these situations? So it's just now that we're having to get to points and times where people are beginning to have to make decisions about, how am I going to protect myself? Do I put security cameras in? Do we really want armed guards in a church? And if we do, how would we do that so we don't send the attitude or that action out there that we don't care about you, or everybody who walks into a black church who's white, it walks in with suspicion automatically. So learning how to protect yourself, how to define the characteristics that a criminal has, makes a difference based on your culture you bring to that. And the more you know about how criminals act and how they behave, the more likely you are to be able to identify their behavior and not necessarily reject them as people, but reject their behavior coming in. For example, first time somebody's coming in, you have to kind of have a sense of who they are and what they're about, and whether they're coming there for the right reasons. I know I met with some managers of 7-Eleven, the convenience store, and they tell their people every time somebody walks in the door, you probably have seen this a lot, to say hello. Hi, how are you doing? You would think that's a courtesy, but really that's designed to let that person know you know they're there, and you have an eye on them. Believe it or not, that hello senses, hey, look, I know you're here. So if you have evil intents, at least you know I know you're here and I'm looking at you. And they say that behavior sort of minimizes the amount of robberies they've had since they've put that in place. So that's just kind of an example of some of the things. Now, it's also a courteous thing to do, to a customer. Hey, how you doing? And in this case, that culture, that friendliness, that culture also serves as a protection culture at the same time. So just to let you know, before you choose a gun, for example, to defend yourself, if you decide a gun is going to be your self-defense choice, you have to ask yourself as a Christian, do you really have it within you, and do you understand at what point in time taking another's life is acceptable from a biblical standpoint? And I bring these up just because they're very diverse scenarios and they're easy to make the point with. There's a lot of culture in between all this. It's more gray that you have to make your decisions about. The question then becomes, in a home invasion, in Oklahoma, for example, if somebody invades your home and they're inside your home and you catch them in there with a firearm and say they're stealing some jewelry out of a drawer, and you catch them and stop them, you literally have the right to shoot them. You have the right to shoot to kill for fear of your life, because that person's in your house uninvited. They broke in to your house. So you literally, under the law, have a right to shoot to kill that person. But then you ask the question, because you have the right, is it the right thing to do? And that's where your culture comes into play. And you have to have all of that clear in your mind, otherwise your hesitancy can cost you your life sometimes. And that's not a fun thing for you to have to do. At that point in time, you need to know exactly what you're going to do. So there's some examples of how culture interfaces with protection, and how to keep from being in violent situations, and what you're going to do to make that happen, and your attitude towards it, and your actual actions towards it. It also has how culture, explained a little bit about how culture plays in the self-defense role. Are you there to disarm the person? Are you there to shoot the person to kill because you have the right to? These are things you have to keep in. If you can't do that, if you can't be very clear in your mind, then maybe a firearm's not your choice for self-defense. So you need to kind of make up your mind about all of that kind of information, and knowing who you are and what you're about, and sort of evaluating that goes a long ways to solidifying your mind what you should do and how you should do it to prevent violence. And if violence does catch you by surprise, and sometimes it will, through all your protection doesn't necessarily guarantee you won't be attacked. So if you are attacked, you have to be very clear, especially at that point in time, because you do not have time to make decisions and go through a logical thought process. You have to react. You have thought through all of this, and you're clear in your mind exactly how you're going to handle it. So I think that's all stuff that's very important for you to understand. And I want you to feel comfortable with that, and that's why I brought this part of information up about protection and culture. It's why it's the first chapter in my book, Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone.com. Where you can find it there. You can go to badguyfreezone.com, and my book is there. And I think initially you can go in and see some of that information, not all of it, but Amazon lets you scroll through some of it, and that's the first chapter, so you might see some of that. So anyway, as always, my prayer for you is for your protection and safety, always. And this is Victor Vogel, uh, creating bad guy free zones.